Hello, my name is Ryan Donnelly, and for Assessment 2, I'll be taking a deeper dive into cyberspace operations, focusing on cyber warfare. This presentation will focus on cyber warfare within a contemporary military context, where I will be using the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine as a case study to examine some of the key concepts, strengths, and limitations of cyber warfare within the 21st century. Before I start, just a quick disclaimer. As the current conflict in Ukraine is still ongoing and highly sensitive, this presentation relies exclusively on publicly available information and does not incorporate any classified materials. I'll first provide a recap on what cyberspace operations and cyber warfare are, and how they are doctrinally used within both Western and Russian military operations. I will then provide a brief overview of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I'll then go through the key cyber warfare events that have occurred thus far, discussing their intended and achieved outcomes, relevant political, sociological, and technological factors and their relationships to other information operation disciplines, finally concluding whether or not these actions have been successful. Cyberspace operations occur within both the information environment and the operational environment. It is unbound by physical locations or international boundaries, providing its users unprecedented access to information, audiences, and critical targets across vast distances. It is a complex and dynamic domain that, in the era of modern warfare, is now a key enabler to all military operations. Unlike traditional domains, terrain within cyberspace is human-made and not restricted by traditional boundaries or demarcations. It can be highly flexible within a contested space. However, key terrain within the physical domain remains its center of gravity for effective operations, as all equipment and personnel necessary to operate within the cyberspace domain reside within the physical world. Cyberspace or cyber warfare focuses on protecting a commander's decision-making cycle and/or projecting power in cyberspace. Offensive cyber operations intend to project power into and through the grey and red cyber terrain, either through exclusively targeting an adversary's cyberspace capability or by creating first-order effects that cascade other effects into other warfare domains. Defensive cyber operations aim to defend blue terrain to enable mission assurance. This is achieved through undertaking active measures to both protect against and repel direct threats, preserving the ability to use the cyberspace and protect the resident data across networks and mission systems. Whilst offensive and defensive cyber operations have separate missions, interoperability and communication between these lines of efforts are critical for the effective implementation of cyberspace warfare effects. Whilst what has been presented thus far has been a relatively surface-level analysis of functions of cyber warfare, it encompasses the core doctrinal commonalities across many Western militaries. This approach promotes unified cyber commands, integrating both military and government cyber functions to produce holistic effects, generating strategic advantage in support of broader spectrums of warfare. This approach champions public-private partnerships that are legislated and regulated within strict cybersecurity frameworks, designed to develop robust cyber defense mechanisms, ensuring the protection of critical national infrastructure and military networks. Information operations have remained a critical aspect of Russia's military doctrine since it was codified under the Soviet Union, designed to obfuscate and create doubt, largely blaming the US for many of the world's problems. The dissolution of the Soviet Union did not end Russia's practice of information warfare. In modern Russian military doctrine, cyber warfare falls under the tenet of information warfare, which, unlike Western military doctrine, covers a wide range of activities, including psychological operations, influence operations, cyber operations, and more. Russia's view of cyber activities as a facilitator of the broader domain of information warfare and not as a distinct act. Contemporary Russian cyber warfare effects are disaggregated across multiple military, intelligence service, and private companies in support of wider Russian government directions. However, these effects are not centrally coordinated. Laws and regulation around cyber activities within Russia are comparatively lax compared to similar contemporary nations. with a silent understanding between private groups and government that as long as computer-based crime is directed outside of Russia and towards its adversaries, it is largely accepted. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine highlights how integrated these concepts are within Russia's application of cyber warfare within a contemporary conflict. Since 2014, with the Russian annexation of Crimea and the subsequent breakaway of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, now controlled by Russian-backed separatists, have been the primary catalyst of Russian cyber-enabled information operations targeting Ukraine. Prior to February 2022 invasion, Ukraine's public sector, energy sector, state media, financial services, private businesses, and non-profit sector were all targeted by Russian cyber threat actors, most of which have since been attributed or linked to either the Russian military, intelligence services, private or criminal cyber threat groups. These major cyber attacks, in conjunction with an intense disinformation campaign portraying Ukraine as the aggressors in the conflict with the breakaway regions, created a highly divisive narrative, promoting misleading interpretations of why Russia was supporting the breakaway regions, ultimately providing a justification for a Russian intervention. In the lead up to the invasion, the information operation campaign shifted its narrative, identifying Ukraine as a now failed state, and that the US and other Western countries wanted the conflict to escalate so that NATO can force a war with Russia. On the eve of the invasion, Russian President Vladimir Putin officially recognized breakaway regions and stated the need to defend them from Ukrainian war atrocities, and was careful to refer to the conflict not as an invasion, but as a self-defense action to protect ethnic Russians. In the lead up to the invasion between January and February 2022, there were multiple cyber attacks deployed against Ukrainian infrastructure, government websites, and banking sectors. These included the defacement of Ukrainian government web pages with threatening slogans in Russian. There were several distributed denial of services attacks across the Ukrainian Defense Ministry and Army, as well as two of Ukraine's largest banking institutions. Whilst a form of malware known as wiper malware, which is used to erase or wipe, hence the name, the hard drive or other static memory of the computer and effects, was used profusely against Ukrainian institutions, Hermetic Wiper, a new form of this destructive malware, was distributed widely in the weeks leading up to Russia's invasion. It was designed to infiltrate Windows devices and render them inoperable by destroying files, corrupting the master boot record, and afflicting physical drives belonging to the Ukrainian organizations. The wiper malware was later attributed to the cyber threat group publicly known as Sandworm, linked to the cyber warfare unit within the GRU, or Russia's military intelligence service. It is evident that the primary intent behind these attacks was to disrupt, degrade, and conduct espionage on Ukrainian ICT services, supporting the narrative of Ukraine as a failed state that required Russian intervention to return to normality. Reliance on disruptive operations stands in contrast to Russia's pre-war behavior, which accentuated espionage. Just as Russia's past cyber operations failed to result in any Ukrainian concessions, no identifiable concessions were made by Ukraine during this pre-invasion period. On the 24th of February, on the eve of the invasion, a large-scale cyber attack disrupted broadband satellite internet access for both Ukrainian users as well as many other users within Europe. The attack disabled modems that were used to communicate with Viasat's KA satellite network system through a new strain of wiper malware known as Acid Rain. As reporting started rolling in about outages, a subsequent DDoS attack was carried out on Viasat's support servers to ensure further disruption. It has been assessed that the intended target of the Viasat attack was the Ukrainian government and military objects, and that all other affected users were likely incidental. Both technical and public attribution linked to this attack back to the Russian Federation, as an attempt to degrade the enemy's ability to monitor Russian troop movements prior to their incursion into Ukrainian territory. Whilst this attack had a significant impact on Ukraine's satellite communications, its impact on other military communications used to coordinate forces and situational awareness was limited due to the redundancies from other forms of communications and ICT infrastructure. This lack of coordination with other effects, such as kinetic strikes, was likely due to the fact that the Russian forces both severely underestimated Ukrainian resistance and that they would likely need to leverage that same infrastructure once they were in control. During the early weeks of the invasion, Russian-aligned social media accounts were consistently promoting and supporting these actions and statements made by the Kremlin. Meta identified hundreds of Facebook accounts created using AI-generated photos that spread Russian disinformation and Russian actions in Ukraine. Similarly, Twitter identified and banned thousands of accounts created in the months of February that exclusively liked and shared pro-Kremlin rhetoric. In the months following the invasion, a now notorious deepfake video of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appeared, telling his soldiers to lay down their arms and surrender the fight against Russia. Whilst it is unknown who exactly released the deepfake, Ukraine's military intelligence agency identified it as a Russian state-sponsored deepfake, intended to sow panic and confusion amongst the people of Ukraine. Utilizing social media to influence and deceive as part of its information war on Ukraine is central to Russia's disinformation campaign. This was also seen during the 2016 US elections through increasing political and social discord in the United States using both state and non-state actors. Whilst research found most people dramatically overestimate their ability to identify misinformation, improvements in social media's algorithmic detection capabilities post-2016 and the consistent exposure to abstract Russian propaganda has meant that the average Ukrainian is now able to discern pro-Kremlin disinformation, limiting its effectiveness on influencing Ukrainian hearts and minds. So, after all of these different cyber attacks, was Russia's cyber warfare campaign against Ukraine effective? Well, not really, according to most military and political commentators. Whilst Russian cyber attacks may have contributed modestly to Moscow's initial invasion, causing disruption and degrading Ukrainian communications, since then they've inflicted negligible sustained damage on Ukrainian targets. Many cyber attacks targeted the same Ukrainian systems also prosecuted later by kinetic weapons, such as communications, electricity, and transportation infrastructure. For almost all of these targeted categories, kinetic effects have caused multiple orders of magnitude more damage than cyber effects were able to achieve. Rather than serving a niche role, such as targeting Ukraine's intelligence collection and dissemination capabilities, a lack of centralization and coordination of cyber effects meant these benefits were not able to be truly realized. Russian cyber capabilities to engage in sustained red and grey zone operations were severely overestimated by both Russia and many Western military experts. It is now evident that Russia's inability to rapidly adapt its analytical tradecraft, instill professionalism, or combat corruption within its cyber capability necessary to maintain sustained cyber effects. This conflict can effectively be utilized as a case study for both future conflicts against enemies likely to leverage cyberspace operations. It is likely that cyber operations will play only a supporting role rather than a decisive role in future theaters of war. Decision makers must be cautious not to trade cyber access for a tactical battlefield effect, risking the loss of operational and strategic access. Thank you all for listening. Please find all references utilized below.